Okay, I think that I should be able to, Faye, for us, just find the record button.
I think I just hit it.
Okay,
So
wonderful.
we're recording to my computer.
Thank you. Just to represent myself, Faye, did we go over the agenda, or did we make it through the group conduct before the announcement from Anor?
No, we didn't. So
Okay.
as we get going, you can see some requests that we have of each other for this session. As we get going, we'd love for you to turn on your video just so folks can get a sense of who's in the room if you're able, but we are sharing a screen, so we know that it's an easy time to turn it off too. So up to you there, but please introduce yourself in the chat box if you just want to share who you are and where you're coming from today. That would be great. As I mentioned before, if folks can plan to keep their audio muted for now, that would be helpful. And I think I have the ability to mute other folks if we end up getting some background noise. Please submit questions into the chat. As I mentioned before, if you have just kind of a technical, logistical question, feel free to just send that to me privately. You can also post questions for the whole group to see in the chat box as if you post to everyone. And Phil will let us know when we'll take breaks to answer those questions. Please join with grace and humor. Grant us some grace. This is our first time running this conference online. And so we're learning right along with all of you. So if there's anything you need that you don't have, please let us know. And we thank you for granting us a bit of grace this morning. And Phil, I actually don't know what stack means. So I'll ask you to explain that one.
So stack is, if I remember correctly, and I'm using the right term, it's if we have a number of people who want to speak during the session, and I just want to make sure that we are getting to them in the order. If they just stack themselves in the chat box by writing their name in stack, I can make sure I'm grabbing them appropriately to ask their questions, and then hopefully nobody gets left behind.
Great. So folks are able to either type in your question or let us know that you would like to ask a question verbally.
Yes.
And we will make sure that we get to those.
Okay. So I will take over from here, Faye, and just lead things along. But where I will start is actually with just a quick overview of the agenda for what I hope we can accomplish today during this session, which runs until, I believe, 11:30. So that's some time for us to be together, but quite a lot of information for us to share amongst ourselves. So following this slide and what we've already done, we'll take a look at income and really have a conversation about 3Squares Vermont, income considerations, and what does that mean? So looking at household composition to see if folks are even eligible to apply together, looking at the types of income and giving you all opportunities to bring up questions about things that come up in your own work, and then taking a look at when and where income comes up at every stage of the 3Squares Vermont application, and then once somebody is enrolled in benefits and then re-enrolls in benefits, hopefully. And then at the end, if there's time, I have some helpful tools to share with you all, as well as if needed, we can answer some questions using those tools. And then also any remaining questions, and then closing out at 11:30 to let you all go and do the things you need to do with your day. I do not mind having questions asked as I'm presenting. In fact, it keeps me kind of engaged and present in what's going on, and makes me feel like I'm not just talking a lot to folks, especially in this online setting. You're more than welcome to stop me, to clarify, to go back and to reshare anything, etc. I really do invite you all to do that. Okay, so. I thought I'd just start with this slide just to kind of, again, present ourselves to the purpose of this conference and what we'll be talking about in the subsequent slides. So what is 3Squares Vermont? It's a program that helps eligible Vermonters stretch their food budgets by giving them money every month on an EBT card. It's something that we always have to remind ourselves, and it's always at the forefront of our minds, is that this is a federal program of the United States Department of Agriculture. And so while it's known as 3Squares Vermont here in our state, it's known nationally as the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP. Here in Vermont, the program is administered by the Department for Children and Families, Economic Service Division. Some of those folks were able to join us this morning for our opening session to share updates. And so those are the folks who administer the program here in Vermont, and they process applications and give the benefits out to the EBT cards on a monthly basis. We always like to include this next point. 3Squares Vermont is a federal entitlement program, which means that everybody who is eligible is entitled to those benefits, and in fact has been paying into them for likely their entire lives. So certainly if somebody is eligible, they should be able to access this really key program. And again, why are we talking about this today? Well, income today, well, it's because income and expenses determine whether or not somebody or a household can enroll in the program, and then how much can they receive. Okay, so what I've done is just pulled the income questions directly from the application. And so you can see questions 28 through 34 of the 3Squares Vermont application actually address income. So 28, does anyone have income from a job, internship, or training program? 29, does anyone get food, housing, clothes, or something else in return for work? 30, does anyone have income from taking care of children? 31, does anyone have income from providing rooms or meals in your home? Include payments from children. 32, does anyone have income from self-employment? 33, does anyone have income from work study, a student grant, or loan? And lastly, 34, does anyone receive income from any other source such as listed below? And so we will talk more about those questions as this session progresses, and you'll certainly have an opportunity to stop me to ask any questions that are coming up for you all. But when we talk about income and enrolling in this program and applying for this program, the first place to start is who's applying and who's eligible. And where we begin there is looking at household composition and determining who is purchasing and preparing meals together in order for that group of folks to apply as a 3Squares Vermont household. There can be many households under one physical address, depending on household composition. So some folks must apply together, so spouses and parents of dependent children. Some folks living together may apply separately, such as housemates or roommates who aren't purchasing and preparing food together. And then some people who are not even eligible for the program may be living with others who are eligible, such as ineligible college students. So outside of who is purchasing and preparing meals together, that being our first question, the second is, are there mandatory household members? That first bullet from the last slide. And those folks are spouses who live together, can never be separated if they are legally married, living together and representing themselves as spouses, or if they have at least one child in common in that household. So that's the first group of folks who must apply as a household together. The second is, are parents living with their children, and that includes adopted and stepchildren under the age of 22, even if those children are living with their spouse or their children. So this is where sometimes we can see that there are some complexities that might happen within a household where there may be a multi-generational household. And then children under the age of 18, excluding foster children, who live with and are under the parental control of someone who is not their parent, they're actually required to be in that 3Squares Vermont household of that adult. Okay.
Phil, before you move on, Faye Longo just asked a question that I think might just be quick and easy to answer while you're talking about household makeup. So she was wondering, with spouses, if they're not living together, they can apply separately, right?
If they're not living together, they should be able to apply separately.
Great. And also, we have another question related. Can a couple be legally separated but under the same roof and be considered separately?
That would then depend on some other circumstances. Some of these questions are sometimes or often very nuanced and can be difficult. Yeah, I see Faye just chimed in too. If they don't have kids, that would seem accurate to me. So if they're not sharing in their household a child in common, then they would be able to apply separately for the program. And also, I forgot to mention this, but just through this chat, I'm reminded there are definitely people on this line who are working with this program every single day. And so I welcome you to share some of what you have been running into as I speak. If something pops up that seems wrong, I'm happy to note it and come back. I can answer quite a few questions, but there will certainly be things that I don't have answers to. And we will collect those and get back to you. Okay, so let's see, mandatory household members. Okay, so once you've collected all the folks who are purchasing and preparing their meals together, and then, or are mandatory household members, you have composed your 3Squares Vermont household. And what has to happen next is you have to take the number of people in that household and then find out the gross monthly income for all of those people combined. So if I am applying for this program on my own, because I am single and living all by myself, I would apply with the I would be able to apply if my gross monthly income was at or below 1,969. If I were applying with my spouse and living with my spouse, we would have a gross monthly income limit of 2,659. So if we made more than that, we couldn't apply for this program. And there are some exceptions that we'll discuss later. And so on through this list of household members being added on. A few things to keep in mind is that the numbers themselves, so it doesn't go from household member like 1,969 to double when there are two people. It's not quite that, it doesn't work that way. And second, that these numbers are updated every October. And so these numbers will be in effect starting the 1st of this month and will remain in effect until the end of September 2020. Okay. So now that we've talked about calculating that gross monthly income of those household members, what counts as gross monthly income for those folks? And we do this because to determine a household's eligibility and benefit amount, you must count all earned income and unearned income before taxes and other deductions. So income, reporting your income and being income eligible gets you through that first stage for most folks of being able to enroll in the program, but it's actually the deductions that determine the overall benefit that you'll receive. So we're focused on the income part today. Earned income includes all income that is gained from working, from performance of service, labor, or work, and includes but is not limited to salaries, wages, commission, tips, payments for services, and then self-employment minus business expenses. I'm going to pause here and ask you all to share examples of what you think might be, an earned income. So toss something out there like works at Hunger Free Vermont, salary. Or if you have any questions so far about what earned income is. W-2 income, exactly. And for verification of these incomes, we're looking for, DCF would be looking for pay stubs or written statements from employers, and those must include the pay dates, pay frequency, hourly rate or salary, and gross wages for each pay date. And if you're paid weekly, you'll need your last 4 pay stubs. If you are paid biweekly or twice a month, you'll need the last 2 pay stubs. And we'll certainly talk about that more later as well. Okay. Unearned income is cash or contributions received by a person for which they do not perform work or provide a service. And so some examples of unearned income include Social Security, disability benefits, veterans benefits, unemployment benefits, public assistance, pensions, and then money received from investments, and the like would be considered unearned income. I see a question in the chat box, but I'm just going to say one more note before addressing that. So here in this unearned income section is where we saw, or where we would consider that additional $600 a month that people received in unemployment during the pandemic. So if a household received that weekly $600 a month payment, then that would be considered an unearned income. And what ended up happening with that being given to households is that some households lost their ability to remain enrolled in 3Squares Vermont because they were no longer income eligible. Now that that $600 has ended, they would likely be re-eligible if their circumstances are similar to reapply and enroll in the program again. I'm seeing some questions. Wendy noted that rental income payment would be considered payment for service, correct? That would be earned income. Sometimes if you're paid biweekly, Economic Services Department requires 3 pay stubs, depends on when the pay falls during the last 30 days, correct, yes. And then how does this work with Venmo and other cash sharing apps? That's a great question, and I actually tried looking into that as I was preparing for this presentation. And it wasn't very clear to me. It seems as if it would be excluded, but that doesn't seem right. I would imagine that it would be an unearned income. So why don't I follow up and find out what Venmo would count as? What about share or rental income? Home share or rental income? Those would be earned incomes for the person who's receiving that money. Child support does count. So if you are receiving child support, you would consider that an unearned income. And so I'm just switching it to the next slide. And then let me just read.
I'm sorry, I have a quick question about the rental income. Is that okay?
Of course, Faye.
If somebody is renting a room in their home, like they would count rent being paid to them as income, but is there a way to discount it for like expenses of having that additional person in the home, or no?
I would have to find out. That's a great question, Faye. Rental income counts, but how do you account for utilities? Thank you.
I think too, Faye, if I can just chime in, that a lot of these really specific questions too come down to if it's regular payments, so like Phil was talking about with unemployment benefits, because they come regularly. So something like rent coming in, that would count as income. But if you're living with a roommate and you all just split rent, that's different than if you are the homeowner and someone is subletting a room from you. So these are, where it comes down to individual cases also, and where the benefits specialists at DCF can also be really helpful in determining the case by case.
Yeah, there are so many nuances with income and it being a case-by-case situation, for sure. And one of the tools that I'm hopefully going to have time to share with you all will show you some of what they look at when making those considerations. I brought back up question number 34. Does anyone receive income from any other sources such as listed below? And these are what is considered unearned income. So in greater detail, alimony, child support, dividends or interests received. And I think that this answers some of what I'm seeing in the chat box. Insurance settlements, money from others, pensions or retirement, promissory and mortgage notes, Social Security, SSI, AABD, trust or annuities, unemployment, veterans benefits, workers' compensation. And so in addition to frequency that Faye just mentioned, another thing is, if you're not drawing on, let's find an example that might be pertinent to me. If I have a retirement account through work, but I'm not receiving a dividend or any type of payment from it on a regular basis, then it wouldn't count towards anything for this process. But if I am applying for 3Squares Vermont as an older Vermonter and I am receiving money from my retirement plans, because I've worked and now I'm resting and enjoying other pursuits, I would count that retirement money as unearned income when applying for the program. Let me see if I caught up. Child support does count. To clarify, veterans benefits, does veterans disability also count? Yes. And what about, yes, it does count. And what about settlements, annuities that people receive yearly, if not taxed? I think if it's yearly, I'm going to have to copy and paste this question and find out for you because Victoria, I'm not so certain. Faye, do you know off the top of your head? No.
Sorry, I wasn't sure which Faye. I'm so nice.
Oh.
I am not sure. I mean, in general, DCF is looking at the last 30 days of income. So annual payments, you know, that gets into kind of the self-employment world of different sort of tax forms that folks look at when it isn't just a clear, you know, here are all the different sources of money that is coming in every month.
Yeah.
But we can make note of that and get back afterwards.
That's a great point. And if somebody did receive dividends during that 30-day period, those would count. Under the table work pay, if the person reports it, how is that proven? If they were reporting that under the table work pay, they could have a written statement from the employer providing the payment to them if they were reporting that. And I will share more information about that later. Oh, Faye did here. It can be reported on the profit loss or via written statement. Exactly. Wouldn't rental be self-employment to count the deductions? It depends on the setup in that situation, so that is a little bit more nuanced. But it could either be self-employment with the deductions, or it could be earned, and then in that case, it would be considered earned income anyway, because it is self-employment. When do your taxes? When you do your taxes, you would use a Schedule E for rental income, and there is a place for allocating utility expenses. Thank you, Margaret. Faye Longo. Thank you, Margaret. I didn't know that. Awesome. Okay, just catching up. One lump sum payments do not count, and we will talk about that later. So example, the $1,200 stimulus check that many people received earlier this year did not count, nor did the $500 that they received for each of their children, if they had any. And we will talk about that a little bit later too. Okay, so back to this slide. Here is just question number 34 with examples of what would be considered unearned income. Okay, and now we're going to talk about some exceptions that exist within these households. So everyone's income counts with some exceptions, because it wouldn't be 3Squares Vermont if there weren't additional exceptions or things for us to note. So the earned income of children in a household who are under 18 enrolled in high school at least half time would not count if they turn 18 and they're in high school. Their earned income would start counting the month following them turning 18. So any expenses associated with being self-employed would not count as income. And then, as Faye just mentioned a moment ago, one-time in the chat, one-time lump sum payments like income tax refunds and other federal lump sum payments like that $1,200 federal stimulus money that came out would not count as income. And then money exchanged between household members wouldn't count either, nor would energy and fuel assistance payments. In addition to what doesn't count, there are some really specific and special rules that apply to older Vermonters and people with disabilities. And so older Vermonters are defined for this program as people who are 60 or older, and disability or being a person of disability for this program is defined as receiving SSI, Supplemental Security Income, AABD, which is Aid to the Aged, Blind and Disabled, DDS, which is Disability Determination Services, or being determined 100% disabled by VA, Veterans Affairs. So for those folks who have a household member who is older or a person with a disability, they actually don't have to meet that initial gross monthly income limit test. So their benefits will be determined by, and whether or not they can enroll will be determined by a resource test, and then also what their net income is at the end of all of the deductions taking place.
Phil, I'm sorry, I have a quick question about that. I was typing it and it was just taking too long.
Of course.
If somebody, this actually came up a couple weeks ago, if somebody in the household over the age of 60, so they meet that guideline, and their income is over the 185%, they would only be categorically eligible even if they met the resource test, right? Because income, their benefit would be based off of their income.
Right. So if their gross monthly income is over that 185%, then there is a resource test. So this is the only group of people who are subject to a resource test. And what happens is DCF is going to look into and account for what they have in savings, checking, investments, to see if and to consider whether or not they have resources. And so there is a limit of 3,500. And if that person who's applying for this program with who may be 60 or older, but is over 185, and they have greater resources than 3,500, then they wouldn't be able to enroll in the program or receive benefits. Did that answer your question a little bit more fully, Faye Longo?
It does, but what I'm wondering is if they're over the 185 and their resources are under the 3,500, is it likely that they would actually receive a 3Squares Vermont benefit?
That all depends on what expenses they take into account.
Okay.
Right? Because if you take a look at what they have in expenses, and this is a situation where you would especially take a look at what their federal medical expense deduction would look like. And I invite you to join me tomorrow for that conversation. Because if you can get their net income down to the floor, then they will be eligible for benefits. Does that answer that question for you? Oh, yes, Phil, thank you for explaining that more. Of course. And just to round out the discussion about resources. So resources, again, include savings, checking, investments, and other assets, but they do not include the primary home, the primary vehicle, and any official retirement or educational savings accounts that exist. So, if somebody has a couple of homes, then that would be considered, the second one would be considered a resource. Just seeing a chat. What if someone wrote, do ABLE accounts change this special rule? If somebody has, Gina, thank you for asking that question. If somebody has an ABLE account, then actually the income that they receive from the ABLE account is excluded altogether. And that was actually one of the examples I was going to show you later. So I'll remember that. And then what if they are under 60 and disabled? If they're, so it's and or, so somebody with a disability as defined by this program does not have to be 60 or older in order to take a step away from that initial gross monthly income test. I apologize. So the hazard pay for essential medical workers that is about to go into their paychecks in November, giving them $2,000 for 2 months of work in the spring, doesn't need to be reported. You would still have to include that on the application, but DCF would, because it's a lump sum payment for work that's already happened, should be considering that an excluded income. So if that person gets that $2,000 for work that's already occurred, lump sum, then it will be excluded. But if they continue to receive hazard pay on a reoccurring basis, then that money would be considered income. Okay. And now the other level of categorical eligibility. And so categorical eligibility is, again, when you do not have to meet that first initial income 185 income test, but it's other things that determine in your eligibility. For the older Vermonter and population who are disabled, that's their deductions that would take into play to bring their net income down, and they may be eligible, they may have to meet a resource test depending on if they're above that 185. There's another set of folks who are categorically eligible, but they neither have to meet the original income test of 185 or the net income test. Their ability to enroll in 3Squares Vermont is dependent on the fact that they receive Reach Up, which is Vermont's term for TANF, supplemental security income, SSI, or having received the Vermont Earned Income Tax Credit. So these folks are able to enroll in the program, but if their net income isn't low enough, it is possible for them to receive a $0 benefit, but still be enrolled in 3Squares Vermont. And this is, if people do have questions about any of what we just covered, this would be a great time for you all to ask them. I can pause before our next section.
Phil, we do have two questions I wanted to highlight before we move on. Steph is asking if households that are in Reach Ahead or PSE still count as Reach Up households and therefore don't have to meet the income limit. I believe that is true for Reach Ahead. You're still in the Reach Up household. I don't actually know what PSE is.
Yeah, that's this post-secondary education. Am I right, Faye Longo? Okay.
Yes, you're
okay.
right.
Yes, the answer there is those two things do not count as income. And one thing I didn't note in this slide about categorical eligibility and why being in one of these programs allows you such much easier access into 3Squares Vermont is because the income limits and the income constraints around these programs are often similar to that of 3Squares Vermont. Except for in the case of the Vermont Earned Income Tax Credit, the income guidelines are actually higher. So if you receive as a household the Vermont Earned Income Tax Credit, you're categorically eligible to enroll in 3Squares Vermont. So that's actually a really great entry point for those working families who might not otherwise be eligible just based on their gross monthly income. And Faye Longo is noting in the chat box that it does open up, being in this program does open up other programs to you.
I'd also add to Margaret that households that are getting a $0 benefit are often right on the precipice of actually being eligible for a full dollar benefit. And by being enrolled in the program and maintaining that, it's really easy to report a change in income and get your benefit if something changes in your household, as opposed to having to go through the full application process again. And households that are kind of falling in that $0 benefit category tend to have incomes that are changing and aren't in a static place. So they often may become eligible in their certification period and just need to report changes rather than doing the 30-day application process.
Yeah, thank you, Faye, for sharing that. That's so true. I'm sorry, I didn't see that question. Margaret, everything Faye said, absolutely. If you're enrolled, I think about if folks were receiving that suspended $0 benefit, officially the suspended benefit before the pandemic, and maybe something happened, like one of those family members wasn't working and we didn't have that $600 coming in at the time, they would be able to report their situation change to DCF and likely be eligible for an actual value benefit. And so that's certainly something we talk about a lot when we encourage people to stay enrolled in the program, even with a suspended benefit, because it gets you enrollment for the certification period that they're eligible for. And if anything should change down the road during these uncertain times, it allows them an easier way of enrolling in the program. So yeah, definitely check in with the people you work with. And if it's a family with children, ask them, have you received the Earned Income Tax Credit? And tax season isn't so far away for the 2020 tax year. And so there will be a lot of folks who may be receiving that money this year, which I think is close to, it's certainly over 6,500 for a family of 4, I believe. Okay, the next section. This is where in these coming slides, I'll be talking about where income comes into play during application, once somebody is enrolled in the program, and then when somebody is continuing their enrollment by recertifying. So the income tests are applied at application, interim report, recertification, and whenever there is a change that causes redetermination of eligibility. Redetermination of eligibility. Okay. Okay, so when applying, and we've already kind of talked a little bit about this in some earlier slides because I think I got a little excited. When applying, all gross wages received by the family within the past 30 days must be shared on that application. So things that can then be used to verify what's reported are pay stubs. If the pay stub isn't available, if it's something that's a little more informal, a written statement from the employer is an opportunity. Regardless, it must include the pay dates, the frequency, the hourly rate or salary, and the gross wages for each pay date that that person is receiving. And then again, a note, if you're paid weekly, then you'll need to provide the last 4 pay stubs. If it's biweekly or twice a month, then the last 2 pay stubs. And as Faye L noted earlier, there may be some times where DCF, depending on the time of the month when you apply, asks for 3 pay stubs. Yes. If the person is self-employed, what they have to provide becomes a little bit more in-depth. So their most recent federal income tax return, including all W-2s, forms and schedules, or record books showing income and expenses for the last 12 months or since the business started, whichever period of time is shorter. So if it's a new business that's only been in business for, let's say, 10 months, then they would provide that amount of information. If it's a business that's been around for years, it'd provide the 12 months for the past 12 months. And then gross unearned income, such as Social Security, SSI, veterans benefits, unemployment or workers' compensation, pensions, dividends, etc. The award letters, any paperwork demonstrating that the income, the unearned income that somebody might be receiving for child support, that would be needed. And then statements from the person actually paying that support, verifying that those are in fact taking place. And then the 1099, those would all be ways of verifying to DCF unearned income. I'm seeing in the chat. Can bank statements be submitted as proof of stuff like pension income? I don't know. And I wonder if it's one of those things that is a possibility, but is not preferred by DCF. And I will put that one in my mind to hold on to for later. Faye, do you happen to know off the top of your head?
I do not.
Okay.
Often I think bank statements are able to count for a lot of proof of income,
Right.
as long as it's clear. Often bank statements don't have the level of detail that's needed to identify what that payment amount is.
Yeah. And just from some of what I hear from folks is that often clients aren't willing to provide statements that have that level of, or some personal level of detail in them, as such as like purchasing this or that, etc. Okay, so this is where income takes place during the application. And so now somebody has gone through the application process. They are enrolled in the program and they're receiving their monthly benefit. Once they're enrolled, our state has a simplified reporting process. So that means that there aren't so many times outside of the regular interim report or the recertification that somebody enrolled in this program would have to reach out to DCF and share changes of income, except when within that certification period, somebody subject to time-limited benefits in a household loses a job, reduces hours of employment, or has any changes on their status. And that's, again, this is for normal times outside of COVID-19. And then second, if a household, when they applied for the program, their gross income was below 130% of the poverty level versus the 185 that we look at here in Vermont. If their income at any point in a calendar month reaches or jumps above that 130, they must report that to DCF within the first 10 days of the following month. And because in Vermont we take an expanded gross monthly income limit of 185 while the federal is 130, it doesn't mean that they will see a change. It's likely that they may not see a change in their actual benefit, but DCF still has to collect that information from the household. Okay, and I just included here a graph of what 130% of the federal poverty level looks like. And similar to our 185, the numbers change every October.
Phil, we have a question in the chat box wondering if at some point in the presentation you'll be talking about how to report changes.
Oh, yes. So there is, if you have one of these two changes, there is a change report form that I have pulled up here, but did not put in my presentation, I realize. And I can grab the name of that form for you. It's just, it's form with a number, change report, and I just haven't, I thought I had it, but I don't, I apologize. Maybe you'll talk about this.
And where would someone find the change report form? Is that available on vermontfoodhelp.com?
It's at this time only available on the DCF website. The change report form
Great.
isn't one that we have available on Vermont Food Help, but certainly one that we have on our list to add to that webpage for sure. Okay. Now, outside of having to report these two items to DCF, the only time you typically have to share information with them or changes is during an interim report and at recertification. So when I was approved for 3Squares Vermont, I was also given a certification period of either 12 or 24 months, depending on my age. And so as somebody who's receiving an income, I'm certified for only 12 or 24 months. So midway through that period of time, at either the six month mark or the 12-month mark, I will be sent from DCF an interim report that I must fill out and return to them, even if nothing has changed. And keep that in mind. So if they haven't received that back, they'll actually, the benefits will close on that account. So some of the things that they're going to ask for folks to report any changes around are if residency has changed. And this one always is interesting to me because I would definitely encourage anybody to call DCF and let them know if they've changed residency, only because the way that they communicate with people is by mail. And if they don't have your proper address, you wouldn't even be able to receive the interim report. If your shelter expenses have changed, if your household composition has changed and suddenly you have one fewer person or maybe additional people, if you have received unemployment money or unearned income, or there have been changes in resources or vehicles. One thing to note with unemployment income, they are able to data match that with the Vermont Department of Labor. So if that household does receive unemployment and it makes them income ineligible to participate, they'll be able to know that on the back end as well. Okay. And I don't know the time to return that to people. It's typically what comes to my mind initially is 10 days, but that may be incorrect. And so why don't I include that in the notes? So I successfully send in my interim report within the time that it is due to them. I use the document uploader. It gets to them and they are satisfied and don't have anything additionally to ask of me. I can continue my enrollment in the program for the full certification period. But at about 6 weeks before my time ends, I will receive a notice from the Department for Children and Families along with another application. And so that is when I would report again my recent past 30-day income, et cetera, in order to continue to be enrolled in the program. if I decide, in fact, to reapply to continue receiving benefits. Okay. Just pausing here to see if there are any questions. Okay. Here's a recommendation that we share often, even outside of what is typical or needed to report. If you as a household have seen a decrease in income and or an increase in expenses that you have as a household that may lead to a higher monthly benefit, report those items to the Department for Children and Families, because you certainly want to be able to get the fullest maximum benefit that you're eligible for. Right now, because of the pandemic, any household that's enrolled in the program is receiving the maximum benefit, except for those folks who have a suspended benefit. So we do recommend during normal times to report any decrease in income and or increase in expenses so that every household gets the highest possible benefit that they are eligible for. Okay. Actually made it through those slides very quickly. So we have time left. I just want to pause here for any questions. And then I actually have the chat box pulled up. So can medical expenses be claimed or reported even without a disability diagnosis? Only if that person in the household is 60 plus. So those medical expenses can only be claimed, Kristen, if the household member is 60 plus and or disabled. Okay. Any other questions? You have a question related to free school lunches. Haley, if you want to ask it, I'm so happy to have Faye on the line. We can try to tackle it together.
Yeah. So I wear a couple different hats in Memorial County, and one of them is working with families and children. And so some families qualify for free school lunches, but they are homeschooling due to other things going on. Oh, you can't hear me?
Oh, we can.
If you can just, it's a little quiet.
Okay. Yeah,
That's better.
I'll get closer. I'll like stop my video and get closer. So the question is free school lunches for those who are homeschooled or doing virtual learning. Because I know that some families are struggling with that because schools aren't providing the to-go lunches anymore if they're in person. So I'm just curious if there's like additional funds to be used for that.
Phil, do you want me to take that?
Do you mind, Faye?
Nope, not at all. So Hallie, right now, every school in Vermont is offering, this might be a little bit more background than you need, but helpful for others. Every school in Vermont is able to offer free school breakfast and lunch for any child 18 or under, whether or not they're enrolled in the school district. They have that ability, and each school is providing and offering meals in different ways. So most schools in Vermont are doing some kind of hybrid model right now where students are learning remotely for part of the week and learning in person for part of the week. Some schools are doing, just a few schools I think are doing all in person for the entire school, and a few are doing all remote. So for the schools that are doing hybrid, school meal programs are offering meals to go. And so one of the things that's allowed now that isn't usually allowed is that you can take meals for multiple days at once. So parents or children can pick up, if they're in school Monday and Tuesday, they can pick up for the rest of the week before they go home. For students who are being homeschooled this year, it's sort of up to the district how they're providing meals. So it sounds like perhaps you have a situation where a school is fully in person and they are not doing any kind of pickup option. If they are doing a pickup option, the children who are not enrolled should be able to still get the meals. For the case that you're explaining, I would I mean, I would just recommend having a conversation with the school nutrition program. They may be able to offer some additional meals for pickup for homeschool families. They may not. You know, their school meal programs and school nutrition professionals are dealing with just ongoing changes in the protocol of how to serve meals, increased equipment, and increased expenses, and just with all the new protocols, it takes a lot more work to put the meals together. So they may have the capacity, and if they don't, a neighboring school district may also have the capacity. So if you aren't in a super rural area where the next school district is really far away, that also may be an option to have. And yeah, unfortunately, there isn't at this point, there isn't another option. Vermont, one of the things that Congress is working on right now is another round of pandemic EBT, which were the extra 3Squares Vermont benefits that families with children who were on 3Squares Vermont or eligible for free or reduced price meals were able to receive earlier this year. So that may be able to help out those families if we're able to get that again in Vermont.
Thank you, Faye, for tackling that. It gave me the time I needed to figure out where I'd put that form. I'm just seeing some additional questions in the chat box. Any tips on best practices for reporting a job change? It seems like Economic Service Department asks for lots of documentation like pay stubs and forms completed by both their previous employer and their new employer. Yes, we definitely hear about that often. Sometimes, and I certainly see how that's a lot of legwork and sometimes maybe even difficult for the person applying for benefits to gather all that information depending on how maybe the relationship ended with their last employer, for example. So I don't really have a workaround on not having to provide all of that information, unfortunately. But I do know that DCF, if somebody isn't able to get that information from an employer, they can provide collateral calls. So benefit specialists will actually call on behalf of the person applying to ask those questions of the employer. And if and even then they're not able to gather the information they need, they may accept it as self-declared from the person applying for benefits. I hope that helps, Sarah. And then from Laura, for folks who would get a $0 benefit or a very low benefit, what other types of encouragements do you suggest to make the application review and recertification process seem worthwhile? I just think, that is also a really difficult question, and one that as I do my own work in the coming months, we'll certainly be thinking a lot about because of how we can reach these people who are so close to receiving benefits, but for one reason or another aren't able to get that actual dollar benefit. And one thing that we always talk about with service providers is if somebody's not getting the benefit, taking a look at what deductions they should be applying as part of their 3Squares Vermont application and seeing where maybe they have they haven't fully declared all of those deductions. So dependent care deductions, medical expense deductions, whether or not they're fully taking advantage of or fully reporting their housing costs, like those are things that could make a difference in somebody who is only receiving a $0 benefit or a suspended benefit and actually getting them the money they need. So I would say start with, if something changes, this is here for you, and you don't have to go through the entire application process every time. If their situation hasn't changed and they're likely only eligible for that $0 benefit still, I would still encourage them to enroll. And what I will be sharing next will be some helpful tools for you to do some playing around with numbers with that person. And then having them relook at those deductions. Okay. Certainly weird times, I agree. ICANN is a benefit to everyone active on 3Squares Vermont, even if the benefit is 0. That could make it worthwhile. Thank you, Gina. Okay, so next I am going to see if I can do this seamlessly or if it's going to be messy. I think I should be able to do it seamlessly. I'm going to stop sharing this screen and I'm going to try to share a different screen. So looks like you're still seeing the same old screen. Or are you seeing our website?
You're now seeing the website.
Okay, wonderful. That's what I want. So I have brought you all to vermontfoodhelp.com. And so this is our resource center for 3Squares Vermont. It's something that Hunger Free Vermont, the food security team, works with our partners, our outreach partners, so many of you here, to look at information, frame how we're talking about the program, and create resources for Vermonters and Vermonters who are eligible for the program and service providers who are working with them to answer their questions about some of the questions that you may have asked today. Maybe this is a place where those answers could have been provided. And so we have one of the places where I have us right now is the COVID-19 and 3Squares Vermont page, because we have been keeping this updated with information that is relevant based on the changes that have occurred because of the pandemic. So some of what we include here are suspension of the work requirement, suspension of the interim requirements, and update it as those things come back into effect. For income considerations, we have this section here just as a reminder to people. So during COVID-19, those federal stimulus payments, that 1,200 or 500, those don't count as income because they were lump sum payments. Another example is that reoccurring unemployment insurance benefit that people received. If they received it on a weekly basis, then it would count as unearned income. But any of it that was received as a lump sum retroactive payment would not have counted. And so that time has kind of passed, but if ever there is a continuation of those types of benefits, the similar rules would apply. So that's just our COVID-19 updates. But the second thing that I wanted to share with folks is that on here, we also house, sorry if I'm going too quickly, our 3Squares Vermont eligibility calculator. And I'm not going to go through everything on the calculator, but I want to show you all that what we have is in this frame, you can enter in, and this is a tool to answer that earlier question that would likely that may help you working with a client see what changes they should be reporting or jumping more into in order to get the highest benefit possible. So it asks about the household composition. So getting to some of the exceptions that we had talked about earlier. And then the next panel is where you would put in the monthly earned income, and it shows examples of what earned incomes count. Oh, and a note here, rental income, if property is managed by self, would be an earned income. Okay, and then the next panel are examples of monthly unearned income. So this is the listing that we talked about earlier from that question on the actual application. So if you include that information here and then you continue through, it will tell you, well, here it's saying, because I didn't put any values in, your total monthly income amount. So mine is 0 because I didn't fill anything in. And because I am one person, an individual, it's showing the income limit of myself. So based on that, I am below the gross monthly income limit and eligible for 3Squares Vermont to apply. And it's after the deductions that my benefit amount and actual enrollment is determined. Okay, let me get back. I'm seeing.
Phil, I ask you a quick question that we got in the chat?
Can you? Because for some reason I can't access the chat right now.
Yep, that's great. So Steph Doan is wondering if the calculator has the ability to factor in the different rules for college students to let them know if they're maybe eligible.
What a good question. We do not have any of the college student rules applied to the calculator. Thank you for asking that. That's something that we can certainly look and see and work with the people who developed this for us and work on updating it if there's a way that we can easily apply those lenses to this tool. Thank you for asking that. Are there other questions, Faye, that are coming from folks?
That's it for now.
Okay, perfect. And I found the chat box. So the next thing that I want to share with you all is I did find the change report form. I had it open in actually a different computer altogether. But so this is how one would report to the Department for Children and Families that they have changes to their income. So it's the Form 200 change report form. And their section is right here on the bottom of the first page is where you would put in changes in income and then provide with this document after it's been signed at the bottom, provide the verification to DCF. And the easiest way these days to do that would be through the document uploader. Okay. And then the final thing that I wanted to show all of you is actually the tool that DCF uses and where they keep pretty much all of their policy notes about the program. So this is something I actually spend a lot of time with, and it does take some getting used to and to get a better understanding of what this information looks like. And I will also add that we often take information from here and try to distill that information on our Vermont Food Help website in a way that's actually much less legal sounding maybe and more consumable for anybody who has questions about the program. Even with that said, there are things about this tool that, because it is so expansive, we have not ever been able to apply to our Vermont Food Help website. And one of those things is just like the nuances of the program. And so when we have a button, we used to have a button on our Vermont Food Help, and I realized we need to bring that back. But you can also just Google in your search bar, search for 3Squares Vermont Program Manual or 3Squares Vermont Policy Manual, and it will bring you to this. And so they allow you all to access pretty much on the back end any of what they're working with. So sometimes if you have a question that they're not even able to answer, this is where they would go for that information. So for instance, let's say somebody earlier asked about the ABLE accounts. So if I were to just put in income into the search bar and then see to the left that I had 27 search results, income being one of them, it's going to highlight in all of those search bars, in all of the window, anywhere where income is mentioned. So here, and I hope you all can see this screen, you can see that it talks about income and then types of income. And right at the top, alphabetically, it talks about ABLE accounts. So ABLE accounts, which stands for Achieving a Better Life Experience, are savings accounts, some additional detail there, and then the status of what that income may be when applying for this program. So here it's excluded. Okay. Now in the chat box, is there another type of income that we had a question about earlier, or I might be able to search for in this tool and see if we can't find an answer? And you get more than welcome to speak any thoughts or ideas or to pop them in the chat.
Yeah, so if someone has a question you want to look up as the example, pop it in the chat and we can look that up.
Oh, and I also see a question. Should people fill out the change report form and submit it, or just call the DCF helpline? With the change report form, I would recommend to start by filling it out, completing it, sending it to DCF through the document uploader with all of the documentation you know might be required, any of the verification. And then I would say follow up with the DCF helpline if you haven't heard back from them. With the call level that they're currently experiencing, there may be a wait time, but if they haven't gotten back to you or haven't made any change to your account, it's certainly worth following up, calling that number. And then I also see from another Sarah, can you show the lump sum policy? Yes. And I wonder if it's as easy as L It is. I just clicked on L and it brings me right down to non-reoccurring lump sum payments. So exclude non-reoccurring lump sum payments, including but not limited to payments received as a one-time payment for income tax, rebates, credits, including the Vermont Earned Income Tax Credit, retroactive payments, retroactive lump sums for the past 1 month or more, such as Social Security, SSI, Reach Up, etc., including that $600 unemployment if people got it retroactively at first. That money would be considered a lump sum payment, and so on through the list that they include. And some of it does become quite in-depth. Is there another question that I might be able to try to search for in this? And I'm looking at the time and we have, it's now 11:24, and maybe just one more question if anybody has one. Okay. In general, oh, Gina, in addition to this opportunity for service providers to learn about these ins and outs, what outreach efforts are put forth by DCF to inform customers about all of these details? That's a great question, Gina. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and come back to the full session. So I think now I'm in full screen, or anyway. So Gina, to answer your question, there's a lot of work that we do with the Department for Children and Families to conduct outreach, but certainly more that we're always working on. So we work closely with, I don't know if you were on the webinar earlier today, but we work closely with Leslie Wisdom and Aletha Cross to try to stay ahead of big changes to the program, have conversations and provide feedback at our normally monthly work group meeting, which has been occurring now every 2 weeks, and then provide feedback to them or ask them questions about what's happening and how we can contribute to the outreach that's taking place. So for instance, with the changes that have happened around 3Squares Vermont and a SNAP, which we have a session on later tomorrow, we provided feedback on the application itself and recommended changes to make it more available to people language-wise. We also provided feedback on the outreach materials that they're developing and we'll have out soon to folks. But it's also an opportunity for anybody on the call here who is a member of one of the 3Squares Vermont outreach grant recipients. You all should have somebody who represents your organization coming to at some frequency the 3Squares Vermont working group. And we also invite other folks to join us as well who may not be those recipients. And you can provide your feedback about what you're experiencing and what you're seeing to those people who are coming to that meeting, or join the meeting yourself if you'd like. And we can have conversations about what we want to share back with DCF or what they're sharing with us, and etc. That's a great question. Okay. Any other questions about anything that I shared today, or anything related to 3Squares Vermont and the conference over these next 2 days? How do we know when or where that is? Oh, you must mean, Belinda, you must mean the 3Squares Vermont working group. That's so interesting because it's not something that we advertise very publicly, but we can consider that. And Belinda, do you work for an organization that does 3Squares Vermont outreach work? I'm not keeping up. Everything's going so quickly. Oh, wonderful. So Kim comes to those meetings. Kim Rivard comes to those meetings with, and we can certainly make sure that you're invited to one if you'd like to join and see what that's about. Oh, not Kim. I'm blanking, so many names. But yes, Belinda, I'll reach out.
Phil, Hallie, and likely others have some questions, and I've received some other private questions about how people can access recordings or PowerPoints afterwards. So I know we're recording all the sessions, When and how will they be available? And also will the non-recorded, just the plain PowerPoints also be available?
Yes,
to
the
folks?
PowerPoints are going to be available as PDFs. We have notes being taken during the session as well. And then we'll be saving the chat too, in order to follow up and address any questions that we weren't able to answer in those notes. The recordings are going to be available online in likely on our Vermont Food Help conference page for the foreseeable future for the next couple of months. But we'll also be sharing in a couple of months kind of our training plan moving forward for the coming year and how we want to engage more online with people with smaller, more compact and specific sessions focused on things like eligibility and income and deductions, so that we can really focus in like we did today on the ins and outs of some part of the program. So we will be sharing that out. And another thing that you can always do is on our Vermont Food Help website, we do include a place for you to sign up for updates about the program, about 3 Squares Vermont, which we send out quarterly. Okay.
So we have just a minute left. And so perhaps if folks have any final questions before we wrap up. And Belinda is wondering about Vermont Food Help, and I'm going to just put the address in the website, vermontfoodhelp.org.
Or
com.
But both of them will bring you. That's okay.
Know that.
Perfect. Well, thank you all for joining today. I hope that you took something away from this session, and I am happy to always be a resource to you all and develop materials that are going to help the work that you're doing. So keep doing the great stuff that you're up to, and I hope to see you at some of the other sessions throughout the next day and a half. Bye, everybody.